Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Gwyn Prosser.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to reply. If I may continue, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is currently attending the G8 summit in Canada. Today, the summit will discuss world terrorism and proliferation.
Order. I don't want the honourable gentleman shouting. He often shouts, but he shouldn't shout now.
If I may continue, Mr. Speaker, today the summit will discuss world terrorism and proliferation. Tomorrow, they will discuss how they can help to promote development and prevent conflict in Africa.
Gwyn Prosser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the day that marks International Drug Abuse Day and Trafficking Day, will my right honourable friend pay tribute to the hard-working people in Dover and elsewhere who police our borders and have contributed to the year-on-year increase in the number of seizures of illicit drugs? Mr. Speaker, last week marked the second anniversary of the tragic discovery of 58 Chinese people found dead in a container in Dover. What progress has the government made to crack down on the evil people smugglers and to improve border security on the other side of the channel?
First of all, may I say to my honourable friend on the question of the people trafficking, there can be no greater menace than those who make large profits out of trading on the misery and the desperation of some of the poorest people. That is why we hope shortly to bring forward proposals that will increase sentences for those who trade in human beings. On the question of progress, we did make good progress at the Seville summit in getting agreement to joint action. Indeed we did, to make sure that we take forward into those areas of entry our joint policing. And the measures that we have taken, for instance, in Bosnia, have been dramatically successful, where we have contributed a 90% reduction in the number of those being trafficked by organised gangs. On the other point which my honourable friend raises on the question of the UN Drugs Day, we fully support both the initiative by the UN and the strategy that we need to take action both on supply and on demand. My honourable friend has already given the House figures on the success we've made in cutting supply. And I think the whole House will want to congratulate the customs and the police on the progress they've made in catching another 140 million pounds worth of drugs in the course of the past year. On the action against demand, we have doubled the amount of money that's available for treatment of those who abuse drugs, and we are on target to get the majority of drug abusers into treatment by next year. That's a solid achievement, and I would hope the whole of the House, including the members opposite, the whole of the House, including the members opposite, would recognise that drug addiction is not only a tragedy to the individual, it's a menace to the community, and we must give it a high priority.
Eric Ford.
When the Chancellor hit pensions with his £5 billion a year tax, he said it was justified because of the buoyancy of the stock market. Last week, the Prime Minister said that the stock market was, and I quote, massively up on where it was 5 years ago. Is he right?
Of course, my right honourable friend was absolutely right in the statement that he made. Absolutely right. And, you know, I do have to say to the right honourable gentleman, and I'm rather surprised it requires a lecture on this from me, the nature of financial markets is they do go down as well as up. Stock markets around the world have been going down in the course of the past 48 hours, and there's no way in which any government can insulate their stock market from that effect. What does the right honourable gentleman ask us to do? Bring in price controls on stock exchange movements? And I'm rather surprised that the stock market going down should come as a revelation to the right honourable gentleman. He surely must remember that during the Conservative years, the stock market collapsed several times, and the change over the last few days is still only a quarter of the worst week we secured in the Conservative 18 years.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the House has normally, when I've questioned him at business questions, been remarkably honest and straightforward with the House. In fact, he has on occasion even apologised to the House when he was mistaken. What is it about appearing at the dispatch box at this particular time of the week that seems to render the Leader unable to give a straight question? He may be here.
Order. 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 Shadow Leader of the House.
It is my first and probably only time, Mr. Speaker. I was going to go on to say that the leader may be representing the Prime Minister, but he doesn't have to impersonate him. The fact is that the stock market today is nearly 5% below where it was when the Chancellor first hit pensions. So I'll give the Leader of the House another chance. When the Prime Minister said the stock market was massively up, was he right or was he wrong?
My right honourable friend was absolutely right with reference. Absolutely. It was absolutely. Well, I'm really not quite clear what other answer the Honourable General obviously were expecting, but he was absolutely right with reference to the date from the last general election, the time when that question was asked last Wednesday. But of course, as I've pointed out, the right honourable gentleman, stock markets did go down, and did go down even more spectacularly under the Conservatives. The difference is that at the present time today, we have a sound economy in which we have the lowest inflation for 40 years, the lowest interest rates for 50 years, and 1.5 million people more in work. On all of these points, we are better than any single day during 18 years of Conservative government. And if the right honourable general doesn't find that good enough, what heights of new rhetoric can he scale to describe the appalling record that they had in government?
Well, the leader really has got a touch of the Prime Minister's today, but the truth is that the Prime Minister was wrong. We know he was wrong, and what's more important, Mr. Speaker, pensioners know he was wrong. The sad truth is that shares in pension funds have lost 1/5 of their value as a result of the government's pensions tax, and that's more than 4 times the fall in the stock market. So can I ask the leader finally if he will apologise to pensioners for what the Chancellor has done to their pensions?
I am astonished at the brass neck of the right honourable gentleman. I most certainly am not going to apologise for the record of this government on pensioners. Next April, the average pensioner household will be £22 a week better off than they were under the Conservative Party. We have increased the pensions by double the level of earnings, whilst they cut it behind earnings. We have also provided a pensioners' tax credit, which increased the incentive for those who want to save, and which will also reward those pensioners who have got a little bit extra income from savings, whereas their government constantly penalised them by introducing a means test. So I most certainly am not going to apologise to pensioners for the record we've given, and maybe the right honourable gentleman, when he comes next to answer the House, may, it's because of his own special brand of compassionate conservatism, like to tell us just how he is going to fill in the form from his leader, inviting him to spend a week with vulnerable people in his constituency. And I would immensely appreciate it if he could tell me what week that is and whether I can come, in order that I can hear him explain to the vulnerable in his constituency how the last Conservative government doubled unemployment, doubled homelessness, trebled children in poverty, and 1 week will not wipe out the memory of 18 years.
John Hume. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the light of recent serious public information about the murder of Belfast solicitor Pat Finucane, is the Prime Minister and Government going to respond positively to the Finucane family's request for a special inquiry into this terrible murder?
My honourable friend raises a matter which I know is of serious concern to his constituents and to his community. He will be aware that there are currently 2 investigations going on. First of all, there's an investigation appointed by the British government, the UK government, of Sir John Stevens, and we have also reached agreement with the Irish government on a joint inquiry by Mr. Justice Corey of Canada. Should Mr. Corey recommend that there should be a public inquiry, we will, of course, implement that recommendation.
Paul Taylor.
A couple of weeks ago, the Leader of the House told me here, I believe that the best, most secure and most transparent way to fund political parties that is least open to misconstruction is from the public purse. This morning, in response to a debate on state funding in Westminster Hall, the Minister said there is nothing wrong with the way political donations are sought and made. Which is government policy?
Well, I have to confess to the House that I had other things in my mind this morning than attending Westminster Hall, but as always, of course, I will study the Hansard with great care tomorrow. I made it perfectly plain to the House when I spoke to the House on this matter business statement that I spoke as an individual. I did not speak on behalf of the government. But I would say that this government has got absolutely nothing to apologise for in its record and donations, and indeed we have been open and transparent. And indeed, we still look forward to the Conservative Party answering my repeated challenges to publish who they received donations from in the years in which they were government.
Paul Taylor.
Shouldn't the government have a policy on this issue? Is this not a matter of trust? Given current concerns about the influence bought by, amongst other, Anderson, the owner of the Daily Express, and the RMT Union, does the government not think it's about time they did settle this issue? Doesn't the Leader of the House recognise that the public think that when auditors, owners of major newspapers and major unions think that they're buying influence, that it's about time the government had a policy so that trust can be maintained?
The honourable gentleman does, of course, raise the precise point in which I have expressed concern that although we have been impeccable in declaring our donations and screening our donations, they are open to misconstruction, and that is why I myself personally believe that putting it in the hands of the British electorate through public funding is the best way forward. But it is a matter that belongs to the British people because it fundamentally reaches into the way in which their democracy is conducted. That is why it's right that the British people should decide, which is why there should be a public debate on it. Could I just say to the honourable gentleman, I'm slightly surprised this morning that he should suggest that the RMT is buying any influence. Spectacularly, I have myself refused to accept the money on the basis of an oath of loyalty. So have my dozen RMT MPs, and so should any honourable member of this free and sovereign Parliament.
Roger Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I received a distressing email from my constituent Sue Brown, who is again under curfew in Bethlehem. Could I ask my right honourable friend, is she not right when she says that repeated Israeli invasions of the West Bank cause untold misery, suffering and death to the hapless and largely innocent civilians of the West Bank? And is she not right when she asks the question how on earth such action can be justified under international law and in the light of successive United Nations resolutions?
Well, my honourable gentleman is quite right to draw the attention of the House to what is a very serious issue and one that is of concern, I'm sure, to all members of the House. We warmly support the call by President Bush in his speech the other day for a viable Palestinian state, and the route to achieve that is by movement on both sides, with an end to the occupation, an end to the settlements on one side, and an end to terrorism on the other side. Without both of those, we will not have a successful return to the negotiating table, and the future of both the peoples of Israel and of the Palestinian territories depends on getting that return to the negotiating table, because that is the only way we'll achieve a secure and just peace.
Peter Lilly.
Returning to the £5 billion a year stealth tax on pension funds, can the right honourable gentleman name anyone who believes that siphoning off millions of pounds from pension funds does not undermine their ability to pay pensions? Anyone, that is, apart from the Prime Minister and, of course, the late Robert Maxwell.
If I remember correctly, the right honourable gentleman had some responsibility for pensions during the previous Conservative government. The electorate have already given their verdict on how he managed his stewardship of the pensions during his time in office, and I'm very happy to put both of them side by side. On the question of the withdrawal of advanced corporation tax, the right honourable gentleman is intelligent enough and well-informed enough to know that that was done in order to make sure that we did not distort the tax system to encourage dividends rather than investment. He will be, I'm sure, because he's a fair-minded man, I'm sure he will be delighted to hear that that particular development has succeeded and that investment in British industry is now £20 billion a year higher than it was under the government of which he was a member.
Martin Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend join me in offering condolences to the 2,500 UK workers at WorldCom in my constituency whose jobs are now at risk as their company teeters on the edge of bankruptcy? A bankruptcy compounded by corporate greed and dishonesty, and a $3.8 billion fraud covered up by crooked accountants. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's high time we heard less bleating and whinging from the corporate world about the burden of regulation and saw more effective supervision of international accountancy practices?
Well, my honourable friend is quite right to express the concern of his constituents on a matter which will be of grave concern to the economy of his constituency. On the issue of auditing standards and the quality of auditing, he will be aware that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the DTI, has already set up an inquiry in order to look at ways in which we can improve both the quality and auditing standards, and whether there are lessons that we can learn from what has happened on the other side of the Atlantic. And I'm sure that that inquiry will wish to consider the latest collapse as well as the Enron collapse. We expect the report in the summer, and we'll obviously look closely as to what action we need to take, and we'll try and take that action as quickly as possible.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Leader of the House aware of the escalating problem of TB in cattle? In Gloucestershire, there are 1,500 whole herd tests yet to be carried out, and that is a backlog caused by the shortage of technicians and vets, a situation brought about by the 10% cut in the budget for actually tackling that problem. Will the Leader of the House therefore do all he can to persuade the government to provide sufficient finance to tackle the escalating problem of TB in cattle, but more importantly, will he speed up the government's investigation into the real cause of the spread of this disease?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a matter which is of great concern in the farming community, and I can assure him that it is a matter that the government takes very seriously indeed. I'm slightly surprised, though, that he should refer to the problem being exacerbated by a cut in funding. This is, after all, a government which has substantially increased the funding which is necessary to make sure that we do police our economy, we do police our society, and make sure that the safeguards are in place. The honourable gentleman belongs to a party which is constantly committed to cutting public spending, and whose leaders actually said they would like to cut it down to 35% of GDP. That would be equivalent to cutting the entire budget of education, the entire budget of health, and all the salaries of the police. I really do think the honourable gentleman cannot go on supporting a party that demands cuts while at the same time demanding increased expenditure.
David Stewart.
Would my right honourable friend share my view that the greatest challenge facing the international community is fighting global poverty, where 1 billion people exist on less than $1 a day? And it's not the acid test of the G8 summit, this war on poverty. And finally, would my honourable friend also share my view that in the future the combination of success must be enhanced debt relief, fair aid and trade, and what we need is a new Marshall Plan on Africa?
Well, I fully agree with my honourable friend on the importance of this issue, and that is why at the G8 summit tomorrow they will be examining how the wealthier countries of the world can combat poverty, child mortality, illiteracy throughout Africa. And the UK government goes to that G8 summit with the strength of having increased its aid by half since the last general election, and having just made a commitment that it will increase by another $1 billion its aid to Africa, reversing the cuts that were experienced during the Conservative government. It is quite right that the G8 summit should address the issue of world terrorism, but it is also important to bear in mind that tackling world poverty can make an important contribution to that, because it is world poverty that provides the breeding ground for terrorism and also the recruiting ground for the fundamentalists.
Take fourth.
Does the Leader of the House agree with the Lord Chancellor's Department that the payment of fines in this country has become voluntary?
I always find it prudent to agree with the Lord Chancellor's Department in all particulars.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is a remarkably complacent answer from the right honourable gentleman, because the sad truth is, and we've discovered this from the National Audit Office, and the Lord Chancellor's Department admitted it, that less than 2/3 of fines are now collected and half of all uncollected fines are written off. That'd be bad enough, but it isn't just fines that are failing. Can the Leader of the House tell me how many criminals failed to complete their sentences to community service last year?
On the question of fines, can I say that we will study with care the forthcoming report of the Public Accounts Committee, and I can assure the House that there will be plenty of legislation, both on the criminal justice system and on the court system in the next session, which will enable us to address some of these issues. On the answer to his question, I cannot answer the question, but since he asked it, I suspect we're about to hear it.
How well the leader knows me, Mr. Speaker. Because the answer, and it won't give him any pleasure to hear it, is that 40,000 criminals failed to carry out their full sentence last year. Now, the point is this, Mr. Speaker. The Lord Chancellor has said, and I quote, "Sentences send important messages to the British people. They show what should not and cannot be tolerated." That's the words of the Lord Chancellor. So is it any wonder that crime is soaring when the message being sent to criminals by the Lord Chancellor's department in their failure is that in the unlikely event that they're caught and convicted, they, the criminals, will get off scot-free?
I would congratulate the right honourable gentleman and have his courage in choosing to go on a crime. He will be aware, of course, that under this government, as the British Crime Survey shows, the amount of crime has fallen by a fifth. The number of police officers is going up. And I have to remind the right honourable gentleman that is in stark contrast to a Conservative government which doubled the amount of crime, more than doubled the amount of violent crime, and saw police numbers fall for each of 5 successive years. And I suspect when I get back to my office and look up the figures on those who completed community service, I'll find that they were even worse under the Conservatives.
Liz Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, my local police have had reasonable success in targeting drug traffickers. Today, 1.5 tons of cannabis was confiscated and 5 people were arrested. A little while ago, a large heroin organisation was busted. However, the victims of addiction remain. Pursuant to the answer he gave to my honourable friend earlier, that the drug budget has doubled in terms of support for victims, could he undertake, A, to keep the adequacy of those resources under review, and secondly, could he closely monitor the pace at which new, more effective drugs are getting through to drug addicts?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for having raised the question of a very serious matter in a very serious and proper fashion. May I say to my honourable friend that, of course, I give an undertaking this government will continue to make sure that we put in adequate resources both to tackle the supply of drugs and to promote the cut in demand of the drugs. We are confident at present that we are on course for our target to get 55% of drug users into treatment by 2004, 2 years from now. Obviously, we'll keep that target under review. We are not complacent, and when we hit that target, we want to make sure we go further. And I can assure my honourable friend this will remain a high priority of this government.
Peter Lough.
Last week at his press conference, the Prime Minister attacked my constituents when, in response to their concerns about the proposed asylum centre at Throckmorton, he claimed they wanted asylum seekers anywhere else but where I am. Yesterday, the Bishop of Worcester said this was an unwarranted slur on the serious intentions of people from the churches of our diocese. Can the Leader of the House identify any church, charity, trade union or non-governmental organisation that does support the Home Secretary's plans to put asylum seekers and refugees in large, remote, rural camps? My right honourable friend appears to be having his own private exchange with the Conservative front bench in this matter, but he has quite properly pointed out that Conservative policy for a long time was to make sure that they would detain all asylum seekers. Can I say to the honourable gentleman, of course I understand the difficulties in local constituencies and the local pressures, but it must be right to make sure that we do provide centres which can provide all the services required by the asylum seeker, to make sure that there are proper education facilities for children, proper health for them, and a proper ability to be integrated through language with the local community. And I do appreciate the local pressures these give rise to. But this is a national issue. It is very important that we make sure that we provide a basis on which we can hold and handle those who are seeking asylum. And it is a vast improvement on the policy of the previous government, which is to pretend the policy wasn't there and let it disperse across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Hugh Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating all those students who will be graduating from universities in the next few weeks? And does he agree that our universities play a massive role in achieving the knowledge-based economy and have a reputation fine reputation throughout the world in welcoming the government's commitment to 50% access for all young people? Does he agree that such expansion will require adequate funding for research and teaching, a fair pay settlement for academic staff, but also a need to look at the problem of student poverty so that those who can benefit most from higher education are not deterred from unreasonable debts?
I fully agree with my honourable friend. First of all, on the question of funding, we have increased funding in higher education by 6. But what is actually more important to the future of Britain as an economy and as a country that can make its way in a highly competitive global economy, we now have one of the highest participation rates in higher education of any of the OECD countries, and that is something of which we can all be proud.
Henry Bellingham.
Mr. Speaker, is the Leader of the House aware that I've recently been contacted by a constituent, Mr. Robert Blunden, whose wife very sadly died of cancer last year. Her cancer specialist recently wrote to a national newspaper deploring the fact that he was prevented from using 2 new cancer drugs as a result of a National Institute of Clinical Excellence not permitting their use on the NHS. My question to him is very simple. Given the government's very welcome emphasis on cancer treatment in the NHS cancer plan, why are there no cancer specialists on that committee?
I very much welcome the Honourable Gentleman's welcome for the commitment we've put to treating cancer, and indeed we have increased the number of cancer specialists throughout Britain, and we are reducing the waiting time for treatment by them. On this particular case to which he refers, I am absolutely confident that the government was quite right to make sure that we put the decision on whether or not a drug should be prescribed in the NHS in the hands of NICE, which represents medical opinion. It is much better that these decisions are taken by medical experts than they're taken by politicians. I shall, of course, consider the point that the Honourable Gentleman made and make sure that the Secretary of State writes about the membership of NICE. But on the fundamental principle, I think it is much better that it is doctors who decide this than he and I across the floor of the House of Commons.
John McDougall.
Would my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the continued trend in the fall of unemployment, particularly since 1997, and recognise that in Fife, in particular Central Fife, my own constituency, unemployment has fallen by 14% during that period. And also note that that was despite the fall, the dramatic loss of jobs in traditional industries. Would you join me in welcoming the many efforts that go on by unsung heroes who contribute to such success, such as Fife Council, Fife Scottish Enterprise, Fife, ordinary people that contribute towards that, such as Leaving Mouth Development Trust. And would you join me in welcoming that contribution?
I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in congratulating all those who worked in the partnerships in Fife and making their contribution to cutting local unemployment. And we should always remember that much of the progress that is made in providing jobs and securing the local economy is made in the local community by members of that local community. It has also, of course, been helped by the measures that we have taken at the national level, such as the New Deal, opposed vigorously by the party opposite, which has created 3,000 new jobs and placed people in those jobs in Fife, 2,000 of them young, long-term unemployed people. And one of the great achievements of this government is that we have virtually removed long-term unemployment among our young people who will be the workforce of the future. And that is a great investment in the future of Britain.
Marion Rowe.
In response to the outrageous slur made by the Secretary of State for Education and Skills, when she said that she would not touch some comprehensive schools with a barge pole, and in fairness to the pupils, parents, teachers and governors of good comprehensive schools, will the Leader of the House name names and tell the House to which comprehensive schools the Secretary of State was referring?
Well, what my right honourable friend said in that speech is that she had taught for 18 years at a comprehensive and would not have taught at any other type of school. And I will not take any criticism of right honourable friend from a Conservative party that is led by a leader who will not touch any state school with a barge pole when it comes to sending his children to school, and who has sent his children to Eton. Of course not.
Order. Is the right honourable gentleman, please?
Of course not all comprehensive schools. Of course not all comprehensive schools are as good as we would wish. That is why we've introduced a new deal for schools, which has resulted in us being able to take out of special measures the majority of the failing schools we inherited from the Conservative Party, and if I remember rightly, the Right Honourable Gentleman was the Education Minister we inherited them from.
Private notice question, Oliver Letwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.